Well, we can go to London and speak to Chris Gunness, who is the director of the Myanmar Accountability Project. Chris, thank you so much for your time. Are we still unclear about whether the junta has accepted that partial ceasefire?
It is unclear, and it is an absolute abomination if we just take stock of what is happening here. As the earthquake was striking, Min Aung Hlaing, a war criminal allegedly at the International Court of Justice, instructed or ordered his jets to be carrying out airstrikes in the actual area of the epicenter. There were drones, there were fighter jets attacking people lying under the rubble. And within hours, he went on television and made an appeal for international aid. Aid has now been arriving from China, from India, from Thailand, from Singapore, from Malaysia. So a man who is accused of genocide at the ICJ, a man who has driven a third of his people into abject poverty and aid dependency, a man who has led what the UN calls a well-orchestrated campaign of terror against his own people, a man who's displaced 3.5 million people. He is now being put in charge of an international aid operation. It's an absurdity. The aid has to go through non-junta groups. One of the amazing things about Myanmar in the last few years is the development of local groups, part of grassroots, bottom-up democracies taking place. They are perfectly capable of delivering aid right now, and we have to make sure that the aid does not go through this criminalized, delegitimate junta, but to the people. And to be clear, the junta controls about a third, if that, of the country. So what about the remaining two-thirds of the country? So yes, we do need to see a ceasefire. The National Unity Government has announced that it will abide by a ceasefire. We need the Security Council to meet in emergency session to pass a resolution which makes it clear that there can be no airstrikes. There has to be a ban on helicopters, on drones, on aircraft, bombing innocents. There has to be a complete a ban on air strikes. We have to see the Security Council backing completely unfettered humanitarian access across the country. The junta needs to restore internet connections and phone lines. How are you going to mount an international aid and rescue operation if you can't actually communicate? And you have to be very clear that we don't see a repetition of what happened in Cyclone Nargis in 2008, where the generals weaponized aid. Volunteers who were working with democratic groups were arrested, they were imprisoned, they were tortured. The junta cannot be trusted. If we're going to see an aid operation, it has to be done through non-junta groups, and it has to be backed by the Security Council, because these attacks on innocent people dying under rubble are an abomination, and they need to stop immediately.
Chris, from everything you're saying, does that mean we still don't know the answer to the question of whether the junta will allow aid to reach those areas? Has there been any attempt at getting to these areas where we have seen some kind of obstruction put in place?
None whatsoever. We're seeing the total weaponization of aid by an illegal military junta. I was interviewed yesterday, and before me, the head of the World Food Programme went on air, and he said, oh, we're starting food distributions in Naypyidaw. Well, Naypyidaw is the military capital. That means that the UN's food agency is beginning its food distributions to the junta. I mean, that's what the UN is cheerfully admitting in public. This is an absolute distortion of international humanitarian aid. The junta has made it very clear, as we saw during Cyclone Mocha in 2023, where the Rakhine State and parts of Chin State, people who'd been under genocide were then under a blockade. And we're seeing that repeated. It happened in 2008, it happened in 2023, and we are again seeing the world allowing this junta to weaponize aid. It has to stop. The Security Council must be involved. The British mission in New York that has formed here, they shepherded through the Security Council, the only Security Council resolution on Myanmar in the history of the UN. They need to call the Council into emergency session, and the Council has to back unfettered humanitarian access across Myanmar, and these illegal, disproportionate airstrikes have to stop immediately because innocent people are being killed. Reports on the ground say there is the stench of rotting corpses, there's rubble everywhere. There has to be an internationally backed, under Chapter 7, the mandatory provisions of the UN Charter, the Security Council has to act, because what I fear is days will turn into weeks, weeks will turn into months, and the people of Myanmar will endure untold suffering. It's happened before, but we must not allow history to repeat itself.
The biggest economy in the world, the United States has pledged about $2 to $3 million to help. The UK, one of the top 6 economies in the world, has pledged about £10 million. And I'd say that's about $15 million. It seems like not enough. Is that possibly because of suspicion of the junta?
Well, I think there's a suspicion not just of the junta. I think there's a suspicion about the United Nations, because the United Nations have time and time again shown that they are prepared to work hand in glove with the junta. And what I would like to see is a pivoting away by the UN, by other international agencies, towards the grassroots organizations within Myanmar who are perfectly capable. They have the reach into their local communities. They need to be empowered. We have to find ways, cross-border cash transfers. People have been doing all sorts of things with this kind of aid. It needs to go to non-junta groups, and it needs to go to local groups who've shown themselves time and time again to be capable of mounting this kind of operation. Of course, we need digging equipment. I mean, the junta cannot be excluded entirely, but we have to make sure that the junta is not in charge. It's a criminal junta. It's an illegitimate junta. It's accused of genocide at the ICJ. Its forces, its air force, have been bombing people. How can they be the people spearheading an aid operation? It has to be completely rethought and pivoted away from the junta.
Chris, really appreciate your taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.